The ACC had to redo the scheduling after admitting SMU, Stanford, and Cal into the conference, but now finally Clemson has their full 2024 football schedule. So let's take a look and dive right in. They open with Georgia, which we knew because that's a non-conference game. Clemson has lost 7 of 8 against Georgia, including, of course, the 2021 season opener, which was painfully brutal in Charlotte. This is the second half of that. That it's not a home and home, but it's 2 neutral site games in which one was closer to Clemson being in Charlotte and the other closer to Athens being in Atlanta. So this one, although neutral, is more of a semi-neutral game. Georgia's a program that's always given Clemson a hard time. They've not just won the last game; they've won 7 of 8. They own the season, the all-time series, 43 to 18 with 4 ties. So you think of it as a classic from the 80s with Danny Ford, but honestly, this is a series that Georgia's dominated. It's going to be really hard for Clemson to win this one, and it's going to be hard. Not really an ideal one for the offense to start off against such an elite defense that'll probably be the number 1 team in the country. But with the 12-team format, if Clemson can win the ACC with any record, they'll probably be a top 4 seed. And if they can go 10-2, they're probably in. So not a dire must win, but it'll be a great test and a fun game early in an awesome venue. Mercedes-Benz in Atlanta is really fantastic. After that, they get Appalachian State from the Sun Belt. Strong Sun Belt program, but Clemson historically has been great against FCS and G5 teams. Really have not dropped hardly any of those. Last one in my memory is Marshall in 1999, I think is the last one that I could recall, back in Tommy Bowden's first year. So Clemson's really solid in those. That's the type of team you want to see Clemson schedule. And yes, I just checked, and Clemson lost 13-10 in the first game of the Tommy Bowden era. So brutal start to that era. But generally speaking, Clemson's been great in these games. And this is, a fairly local team that's pretty good, but still a game where you feel Clemson will be a heavy favorite. So you like that, especially coming off of Georgia. They get an early open date. And I saw a lot of people immediately complaining that this open date's too early. There's 2 this year. So they get one early, which is not so bad because you've got that Georgia game that's going to beat you up. You come home, hopefully get a win under your belt so you can go into the open date with a win, and then sort of have the next segment of the schedule after that. Next is NC State. Clemson's dominated this rivalry, particularly at home, but they've lost 2 out of 3. Now, those 2 losses were in Raleigh, but I think NC State is going to be one of about 5 teams competing for maybe 6 or so teams that have a really, really good shot to make it to Charlotte for the ACC championship. So that's a big game. Revenge factor. They've got Coastal Carolina's quarterback who transferred in, Grayson McCall. So they're going to be no pushover, but Clemson does really well against them at home. So you got to feel good about that. And then Clemson gets their first taste of new ACC teams with Stanford coming to Clemson this year. So the ACC, as frustrated as I and most Clemson fans are with them, did Clemson solid in a lot of different ways on the schedule. One of them is they're not making Clemson go to Cal or to Stanford for quite a while. We knew that coming in, but this is perfect spot for Stanford. They're before Florida State. This is not the most intriguing game on the schedule. It's probably second or third, or probably the third least intriguing game on Clemson's schedule, at least home schedule. I would say it's schedule in general. But getting a weaker opponent right before Florida State is perfect. The only other time these teams matched up was in the '86 Gator Bowl, which Clemson won. After that, you got the big road game at Florida State. So you kind of look at this first 6 weeks of the season. You got to beat Georgia or Florida State. If you can win one of those 2, and of course win the 3 in between. So if you get to 4-1, feel like this first segment of the year has been a success. And Florida State is obviously a very good team. Very good program. They're clearly kind of back. I mean, they won the ACC, so obviously they're back. But they're not going to be the same team. I think they're going to take a pretty big step back, and that doesn't mean they're going to go 6-6, but they've got to replace Jordan Travis, and they brought in DJ Uiagalelei, who had, good PFF grade, solid, but he's not dynamic. He's not Jordan Travis. by any stretch of the imagination. I thought I thought he was very good all season and against Clemson. Florida State will also have to replace both defensive ends, Jared Verse and Patrick Payton. That's going to be huge. Maybe even bigger, they'll be replacing both superstar wide receivers, Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson. They'll replace star running back Trey Benson, defensive tackle Braden Fisk, who they got from Western Michigan last year as a transfer, and I thought he was great. Cornerback Jerry and Jones, and former South Carolina Gamecock tight end Jaheim Bell. There's a ton of production to replace. That's not it. They've lost several other guys. Bless Harris transferred to TCU, and several others. So they've got a lot to replace. And I know they're the transfer kings. And they'll bring in some immediate talent. That's a lot to replace. So I think I actually feel pretty decent about Clemson going to Florida State. After that, Clemson gets a pretty soft back-to-back. They've got Virginia, or they go to Wake Forest, and then they come home for Virginia before an open date. So kind of a soft landing after the big trip to Florida State. So if there was a trap or a letdown game, it's not going to be a particularly dangerous one. Clemson has dominated both of these opponents. Obviously, they've played Wake Forest way more in the years of having them as an every single year Atlantic Division opponent, but both of them, Clemson's really, really dominated. Tigers are combined 111, 25, and 2 against these two opponents combined. So I think these are two of the easier games on the schedule, but what I love is you get Stanford, and then you have the big game at Florida State, and then you have Wake and Virginia, right? So you're sandwiching the tough game with softer games. Likewise with Georgia, you have, this is the first game, so you have no games before it, but then you follow it with App State and an open date, which is great, right? So doing themselves some favors, and the ACC doing Clemson some favors, kind of sandwiching their toughest games with softer ones. You come out of that open date and you host Louisville. Clemson actually hasn't been great either going into or coming out of open dates. That may change with Chris Rumpf and Matt Luke and just basically a much improved coaching staff with those changes. But I don't look at the open date as a huge advantage in that regard. And Louisville is going to be tough. I mean, Louisville was the better team this year. They obviously didn't play, but Louisville won 10 games, went 10-4. They played for the ACC championship, but they're coming to Clemson. They've never beat Clemson. So you got to feel pretty good about that one. But then after that, I think a very tricky spot that I think a lot of fans are going to overlook is road trips back-to-back at Virginia, at Pittsburgh. Now, I know Virginia Tech was only 7-6 last year. Not great, but they finished 5-2 over the last 7. They returned basically the entire offense, including Kyron Drones, and he was awesome. Incredible runner, ran all over Tulane in that bowl game where it was really rainy and they had to lean on the run game. They couldn't stop him. I thought he looked really impressive. I think Virginia Tech is a team to watch. Would not at all surprise me. They have a pretty soft schedule besides this. They don't play Florida State. They play a really weak non-conference schedule. I could see them kind of, in fact, right now, my early kind of inklings are they're going to be next year's Louisville, where they're decent, but not probably the type of team that should win 10, 11 games, but due to their schedule, they do win 10, 11 games. And that's what Louisville did last year. They took advantage of a weak schedule. I think Virginia Tech is primed to do that. I could see them having, one loss in November for this game. This game is November 9th. I could totally see Virginia Tech only having one loss, being highly ranked, and this being a big showcase game. And I could even see it being a game that's played twice with a rematch in Charlotte for the ACC championship. So I think that's a really tough spot for Clemson. Even if they survive that, they then turn around and go to Pitt. And now Pitt, another team, they're more extreme. They were 3-9 last year, which is obviously terrible. But Pittsburgh's been a very good program under Pat Narduzzi, and I don't think you expect them to stay that way. They went out and got Phil Dracovic last season, Notre Dame quarterback turned Boston College quarterback who went back to his home state to play for Pitt, and he was terrible. I don't know if he was healthy. I don't know what the deal was, but that was a big surprise. But generally speaking, this has been a consistent program. Prior to last season, they were 34-17 in the prior 4 years, and even better, they were 20-7 in the prior 2 years. I don't know that they get all the way back to that, rebound that quickly, and win about 10 games. I'm not going that far, but I'd be shocked if they were a 3 or 4 win team. I think this is a team that rebounds and is not going to be an easy out for Clemson. So I don't know if Clemson wins both of those road games. I think that's going to be tricky for Clemson to pull off. But after that, they host the Citadel. Citadel is a bad FCS team. It's not the last home game, but they've traditionally done senior day then instead of South Carolina is so much hoopla. They've generally done it the week prior if it's a home game. So expect senior day, and with it being, this isn't announced to my knowledge, but with it being the Citadel, you could do military appreciation day that day. They usually do that for the Citadel. I don't know if they'll do both on the same day, but regardless, either of those make it immediately worth going to and watching. Senior day is a lot of fun. Military appreciation day is by far my favorite kind of theme day that they do for Clemson. I always enjoy it. They do a great job. Play the Marine Corps hymn. One time they had Lee Greenwood come at halftime in person, which I loved. I know it's cheesy, but I loved it. So that should be fun. And then they close out with the Palmetto Bowl. South Carolina missed a bowl game last year because they lost to Clemson. They've got a really tough kind of life ahead with the improved SEC, adding Oklahoma and Texas. Kind of got a question, why would – I know the money's good, but you almost – if I'm South Carolina, I'm voting against Texas. I'm fighting against Texas and Oklahoma joining because those are just extra losses when you have to play them, 9 times out of 10. So they're going to have a kind of a tough life ahead, and they'll be a fringe bowl team at best. But it's always a fun game. If you win by 60, you had the time of your life. It's not like beating the Citadel by 60. You crush South Carolina, it's a blast. If it's a close game, obviously stressful, but then you have an exciting game. So that one's always fun. All in all, I think this is a moderately tough schedule, but as much as I'm frustrated with the ACC, they did Clemson some favors. You got NC State after the early open date. You have Florida State sandwiched with, probably the 2 weakest, if not the 3 weakest opponents in the ACC. So made that as easy as possible. You have an open date before Louisville. The Louisville, Virginia Tech, Pittsburgh stretch is going to be a really tough one to go 3-0. I don't know if that's a complaint, but that's probably the toughest thing there. But aside from that, you got to feel pretty good. You got to feel like it's an exciting schedule. And certainly one thing to be really happy about is there's no Thursday night road game at Virginia Tech or Friday night road game at Pittsburgh or anything like that. Those always seem to be tougher. And so it's a good break for Clemson to not get stuck with that. So let me know what you think. I'm thinking Georgia, obviously, and maybe Virginia Tech are arguably the toughest games on there or the trickiest ones. But definitely join in the comments below and let me know what you think. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. We're over 800 subscribers, trying to get to 1,000. That's when you could really partner with YouTube. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. And if you have, thank you, first of all. And second of all, don't forget to like this video. Thanks so much for watching, and go Tigers.